in your opinion, what's happening out there and how can this study interact with that?
Sure. Thanks very much. I mean, for us, this is an issue that we've been raising, in fact, since 2009 consistently. We've used the Secretary General's reports to the Security Council on protection of civilians in armed conflict as a vehicle for bringing attention to this issue. And I think there's a very simple reason for that, and that is that the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, and particularly those with wide area effects, has an obvious and very serious humanitarian impact. Most immediately, obviously, civilians are killed and injured, and I think that's often what grabs the headlines, but the problem is actually much deeper than that, and I think you need to sort of look beyond the headlines and get a sense of the problem. And what we see is a very predictable, I would say, and a widespread and a long-term pattern of humanitarian harm, and I think it's very important to take that aspect into account. You see civilians suffer, or those that survive attacks, you see them suffer life-changing injuries, and those can have a long-term effect not just on the victims, but also on their families and their communities, especially if they don't get the support they need, and that could be a very different, a very sort of a broad range of support, from psychosocial support to particular forms of medical treatment, which isn't forthcoming. We see hospitals and schools being damaged and destroyed in attacks involving the use of explosive weapons, and that obviously has an impact on communities in that sense. We see civilians displaced as they flee attacks that damage their homes or destroy their livelihoods or that cut off essential services like water and electricity and things like that, which is obviously another important dimension to all of this. And I think with the displaced as well, it's not just that they're forced from their homes. Becoming displaced is often just the beginning of a whole new series of challenges to their survival, which certainly in the international community we're not always able to respond to depending on where these people are. So I think there's very serious ramifications there. And obviously destruction of homes and that sort of things also makes it very difficult for the displaced to return at a later stage when the fighting has moved on or ceased. As I mentioned, livelihoods are devastated as shops, offices, factories, workshops, those sorts of things are damaged and destroyed. And in our experience, the use of explosive weapons generally means the presence of explosive remnants of war, which remain a serious concern until they're removed. And then one final point for us is that as the use of explosive weapons becomes more protracted and more widespread in a conflict situation, then obviously we see a dramatic escalation in post-conflict reconstruction requirements and also the costs of that, which will often be borne by donor governments, which I think should be a concern to them. So I think for us, there's a very clear humanitarian impact there, and it's something that we're keen to see some action on from the international community.